everyone, my name's Jake. Welcome to Living My Best Life, the podcast. I am here today with Lynley. Hello.
Hi. He's living his best life because he's with me.
Obviously, we're a great team.
Obviously.
How are you?
I am fabulous, albeit suffering from a little bit of hay fever.
So today we're going to talk about the 6 domains.
Yes.
Which is a part of the training package that we do.
Yes.
So brief overview, kind of what do you do? And then we'll go into stuff about the domains.
Okay.
So what do you do?
What do I do? Okay. So I work at RUAH Community Services as part of an enhanced service team, which is a special project until July next year, where there's specialist services that work across the 3 services within RUAH. I'm a disability navigator, so I support staff to support clients with disability, and I also offer education for staff within the organisation around disability, funding, community support, any type of question they could possibly think of when it comes to disability. So I work across homelessness and housing, the mental health and wellness team, and also the family services team, which works with family domestic violence. My role's really varied. Most of my clients are within the homelessness and housing space currently, but that will change. It's a really changing landscape, my role. Because it is brand new, I'm also developing it at the same time, so I'm finding out what my limitations are as one person across 3 services. I'm also building my networks within the disability sector, so I've linked in with quite a few agencies and have discovered that there are a multitude of agencies potentially working on one person. So a lot of my role has been about pulling those agencies together around the table, making a plan, telling everyone what they need to do. Giving them a list at the end of it.
Seeing if they end up doing it.
And then chasing them with a big stick if they don't.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, it's a relationship building role, it's a guiding role, it's an education role, and it's a making people feel safe role, especially when it comes to our friend, the NDIS. There is a lot of misconception around it within the community about what it is actually for. I spend a lot of my time explaining the difference between an insurance scheme and a welfare of such, like DSP. I spend a lot of my time guiding staff on what questions to ask people when they're initially looking at getting access for NDIS, because I think that's a really huge thing. And then really breaking it down and looking at what is it we're actually asking for, and is that achievable? Do we have the medical evidence, which we'll get to? Do we have the evidence? Do they cover the 6 domains that we're going to talk about? Where can we really hone in? Who can we contact to talk to about it? Do they have a history? Have they tried everything? And what is the client's expectation? Because I think the biggest thing that I'm finding is, even if we get someone access, which is pretty impossible at the moment, especially in terms of psychosocial. As we know, only about 52% of people are being approved. And a lot of people are coming back with, you need further evidence, or we don't believe you've exhausted all treatment options. It's a chat around whether the person that we're applying on behalf of or assisting to apply actually has that capacity to actually utilise. And that's a really, really big conversation that's having to happen with clients and staff, and the understanding of what it means to actually gain access, and then how to utilise it from there, how to navigate the disability sector that is, still ricocheting from COVID with a really massive lack of support workers and reputable support coordination companies, because there's a lot that have popped up, and just because there's a lot doesn't mean they're good.
So within the 6 domains,
Yes.
the 6 different areas that the NDIS assess whether someone has a good quality of life, if they've got skills in each of those.
Yes.
As a quick overview, how is that important when we're applying for the NDIS?
I think what it does is it gives really qualitative review for NDIS. It's like a process, it's a tick box basically. So what it means is that everyone is assessed on the same scope, on the same level.
Yes.
So they all go, okay, do they meet X, Y, and Z? And so those 6 domains, and I'm going to try and remember them off the top of my head, even though I've got them in front of me, but I don't have my glasses on. I've got communication, self-care, self-management, mobility, and learning. Social interaction.
Social interaction.
I was like, I remembered, forgot. See, even for me, who deals with it all the time, it's hard to remember what they are. So there's those 6 domains. I think the good thing about that is that you really only need to have one of those met when you're applying. So you don't have to water down your application to cover all those 6 domains. You focus on one and then build it from there. So make that one really good. And that leads you to the thing of making sure that you've got relevant evidence for that. So it's all well and good to say, yes, I struggle with, on days when I'm not great or I haven't managed my meds, I'm struggling to get out of bed and have a shower and meet my appointments. So there's a couple of things in there. There's probably self-care, self-management, and also potentially communication. So there's 3 things in there, but I think the really important thing is just to hone in on one of those areas, the one that you think would be most appropriate to your situation, and then build out from there. And then have that backed up by your medical evidence, which is a whole nother podcast on evidence.
Yes.
We're not going to delve into that too much right now.
Not yet.
Yeah.
And it's about proving that the area affected, like
Yes.
the domain that's affected,
Yep.
is by the impairment, is the effect is permanent.
Yes.
And it's significant.
Significant.
And it's proving that the effect is permanent and significant, which can be pretty hard.
It can be very, very hard. So permanent and significant are 2 of our favourite words that we use with NDIS. It must be lifelong. And I think the ironic thing, and I talk about this when I do the training, is that whilst NDIS is to build capacity, in order to get that, to build a capacity, you have to prove it is significant, permanent, and you'll need it lifelong.
Yeah.
So you kind of go, slight oxymoron there in that, how am I meant to build capacity if it is that significant, if it is permanent,
Yes.
and it is going to be lifelong? Yeah, I guess that's a whole other podcast in itself, basically. But it's looking at the functional impact in all of those areas of how you're affected on a daily basis. And a really good way to look at those 6 areas is to think about, what can someone like myself do, so me as a Lynley, compared to someone that lives with psychosocial disability. What is it they're unable to do? And that comes down to those hard conversations and those uncomfortable conversations around really peeling back the layers of someone's life and moving away from that recovery coach-based language of, let's be innately positive and everything's going to be okay and these are the great things that you can do. Actually, we need to know the things that you can't do. You are unable to do this because of this. You need significant assistance in regards to that. It's not the wishy-washy language for domains around, would benefit from, give me another example.
Onboard bad days, or may
yeah.
experience this.
Struggles with.
Yeah.
I mean, yep, everyone struggles, everyone has bad days. Everyone would benefit from, $100,000 in a fast car. No, just joking. It's been really, really succinct around those areas that are affected in your everyday life. So a really good tip that I give clients that I'm meeting for the first time. So when I'm support staff at RUAH, I will sit with a support coordinator or the support worker and assess the person on a case basis before I actually meet them and build that relationship. Because I am one less person that person that's either in trauma or whatever state they're in needs to build a relationship with, because I can do a lot of my work from behind the scenes. So I would much rather assist the staff to be able to ask those questions because they've got the relationship with the person. I'll assess the case and then I'll look at what areas that we need to look at to kind of hone down into. So it's a process and it is a tick box. You've just got to make sure that you get it right first time and then have the evidence to back it up.
Because you've seen and talked about so many times where it hasn't been done well, and so it might be watered across, or the one which they do isn't fantastic, and so when that's rejected, then that's a lot more work than would have been done if it was right the first time.
Yep, absolutely. And a really important thing to do is to make sure you've got the evidence of psychosocial disability form included with your access request form.
Yes.
So you can further evidence what that psychosocial disability, the functional impact that it has on those 6 key areas. So really, they're quite straightforward. We've got an incredible resource on the Living My Best Life website page.
Yes, we do.
And it is called, let me tell you, functional domains. I've got it pulled up on here. Prompts for Clinician Report, and it's part F of the NDIS access request form. So basically, this goes through all the functional domains, which are those 6 ones.
Yes.
In those 6 areas, this gives you concrete examples of functional impact, and it also prompts you to think about what supports might be appropriate for that functional impact. But what it also does is it stretches your mind a little bit further and blows it a bit by giving you actual examples of symptoms that relate to that functional impact.
Yes.
So, for example, the one I'm looking at the moment is mobility / motor skills. And say an example of a functional impact in this area would be difficulties using public transport, leaving the house, going to shopping centres, attending recreational vocational activities. So the support you would consider would be a person to accompany them when using public transport, or provision of transport if it's safe, or personal support to build confidence and provide feedback, or aids and equipment to overcome movement difficulties to help cope with symptoms. What symptoms are there related to mobility? So if you think about mobility, what symptoms would you think would be related to mobility?
The first thing that comes to my head is a physical disability. Say if you're in a wheelchair, that would be the first thing that comes to my head at least.
Yeah, me too. So when I read this, my little tiny mind was blown that some of the symptoms related to mobility issues within functional domains are paranoia, anxiety, sensory sensitivity, low confidence, side effects causing weight gain, lethargy, tremors, and compulsions. I was like, what? Hang on. So this particular document gives you really, really good symptoms that you would absolutely not think about or relate to, because we're so focused on what we think we know in terms of disability, and there is so much more out there that we don't know. I learn something every day. I don't know how, but I do, even in my tiny brain, like I said.
It is worth noting this document was written up by the North Eastern Healthy Communities. We didn't make this, but we think it's the holy grail of documents. We'll link it on Spotify as well as our website, so everyone can get a copy.
I think the really good thing about this is when you read it, it's so well written and it's so objective that it could relate to anyone, and it's not about you copying someone else's functional impact. It's about, I think the thing that this does is makes you think about what the relevant example is to your life, basically, or the person's life that you're supporting. So highly recommend you jump on and get that resource or click on it in the Spotify link.
Yes, because then it also goes across into the functional impact and what does that mean in mobility, and then across to what supports could be considered. And when you're writing your application or when you're going to a GP and asking them to help with it, it's a good document to have.
Get someone to have a look at it too. Once you put it all together, second set of eyes always. And I've got some tips for writing evidence for the 6 domains basically. And these are the ones that we run through for the training. So I figured they were kosher and and right, and I haven't made them up. So
well, I mean, you could have come up with the tip originally.
I could have actually. So I'm going to sound like I'm reading the news, but some of the tips are: it's important to use language that's clear, concise, and doesn't leave any room for misinterpretation. So again, NDIS don't need to know how this happened to you or the story around it, or anything to do with you personally as such. You might have a grumpy disposition, or you might annoy your neighbours, or you might something. They don't need to know that unless it is a direct functional impact of your disability.
Then of course include it.
Well, of course include it. It says focus on the focus on the psychosocial disability only. So if you've got comorbid, just focus on your psychosocials. And when I say comorbid, say if you are living in a wheelchair with a psychosocial disability, in terms of the psychosocial application is just on that. And you've got a great example that we use during the training.
Yes, so Lee from the graphic novel.
Yes.
So she has PTSD and is in a wheelchair.
Yes.
And if in the application it was cross-referenced between the two, of the physical and the psychosocial, well, it questions the permanency of both. And that's kind of one of the big things in the NDIS, being permanent.
Yeah.
So it's super important to keep them separate.
Yeah, absolutely. which leads me on to the next point that says leave out any mention of difficulties that result from the health condition alone. So, and then lastly, consider how the person's mental health condition impacts their management of their physical or other conditions. So they're really good tips for writing those 6 domains.
Say you've just come into the NDIS space and you haven't really worked in it before, and you're working with the 6 domains and you don't really know how to navigate them. Outside of this podcast and the training, what advice would you give to someone to just understand them a bit better?
Well, there is the rabbit hole of the NDIS website. All of this information is there. It is just about whether you can make yourself a cup of whatever is your favourite and take the time to jump down that rabbit hole. You can potentially maybe ring advocacy services, although I know the wait to speak to those guys is pretty long, or they may be able to answer a question for you quickly over the phone, I'm not sure. I guess the other thing would be to ring NDIS themselves, although we all know that can be a joyful adventure where you often end up with not the answer that you're looking for. But you could try, because I have heard some people have rung and had great success chatting to someone asking a question, or you have the success that I had where I was told to apply to get declined to even be able to speak to the access request team for information to apply. I'm sure that if you rang one of the more renowned or well-established service providers within WA, they would potentially guide you in the right direction as well. I think it's just knowing that there are places to ring and knowing that you can ask the question, because a lot of people are afraid to ask.
Yes, they silo themselves. So what they do know, they keep to themselves, and what they don't know, they will never know because they don't ask.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are not really any specialist services where you can go to apply for the NDIS. There is APM and Mission Australia, who are the partners in the community with NDIS. And I do know that their service model is to assist people to get access NDIS. Yes. So if in doubt, go to one of those 2. Well, I mean, it's good because the website's really clear. It tells you what your eligibility criteria is, and then you can delve into the rabbit hole of all the different areas. But it does have everything there.
And there is the easy to read versions of stuff, which make things a little bit more digestible.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have a chat with people around it, most people have had some kind of experience with the NDIS or have heard of someone that's had an experience. Yes. So then they might be able to direct you with someone else to speak to as well.
So maybe a community of practice, which we're running as a part of the program, could be helpful.
Stop it! That was a good segue.
Thank you.
Yes, there is a community of practice that we are running bi-monthly.
So every 2 months?
I'm so confused by that. Every 2 months, we're going to hold a cuppa and some yummy food and a chat, talk about relevant topics at the moment, what's happening with the NDIS, get anyone to jump up and or sit down and tell us about any difficulties they've been having, any feedback they've had, any success that they've had with the training, and really just open up conversation between agencies and service providers and stop everyone being so siloed.
Yeah.
Come join the community of practice. We'll be there, so it'll be amazing.
Any tips or any final advice would you give around the domains at all?
Don't be afraid of just tackling one domain. Definitely within psychosocial, as we speak about in the training, you will identify other domains as you unpack one domain. They generally cross over. But again, don't keep it watered down. Be clear and concise and have evidence to back it up, basically, from a medical professional, allied health professional, or a GP, or an appropriate clinical physician.
So if one does leak into a couple, then to make sure that if you are going to include them, make sure they're at a good bulk standard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, make sure they are, and include everything. You know, like don't leave anything out. Like don't think, oh, I won't say that because that sounds really negative, or you know that doesn't sound good. Like that makes me sound really bad. This is bad. Your life is not great. You know, you need assistance on what you're doing. So you just have to own that as much as you can with the support of people around you and get the assistance that you need.
So that you can live your best life.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of living our best life, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate all the input. So yeah, we'll see you guys in the next episode.